in that space, there were, photo 15 is on the screen.
It's the same. It's the same. You can use this. It's the same.
Now, evidence is that there was a scuffle in that space among 2 suspects and 6 adult persons that were in the house. Now, I want to touch on this with respect to the PR test or the GSR test. What is the radius for the GSR to attach to people that are near when the firearm is fired in that space?
That, unfortunately, I won't be able to tell you. That's for ballistics.
Okay, all right.
Lona kumbuzo ngibuza wona ukuthi ibanga ke uma kuzotestwa ke impuphu lena esibhamuke akusona kumbuzo ngawuphendula abama ballistics abangaphendula lokho.
You also spoke about the searing around or the burn around the entrance wound. Can you describe that for us?
When the firearm, when the firearm is fired and the gunpowder is ignited, there is a flame coming out. So that burns the edges. So you get the searing effect.
Uma ukuthi ke isibhamu siyaqhuma ke ukhona ke lokho ngathi ke umlilo ke ophumayo ke manje lokho kuyashisa ke lana kuloko kubiza ukuthi ke ama edge.
And in general, with contact wounds against the clothing, what sort of a mark will a contact wound have on a T-shirt if the muzzle is pressed against the skin and the T-shirt?
It depends. It could be anything. It could be nothing. It could just be a hole, or you could see, depending obviously the angle of the firearm and how it was held, that you could see some of the remains of the gunpowder.
Uma ukuthi ke isibhamu sibekiwe ke kuyona i-T-shirt leyo ke kusengenzeka kungaboni lutho kusengenzeka ke ubone nalokho ke kudepend ukuthi ke isibhamu besibekwe kanjani ke la emzimbeni noma kuyona ke i-T-shirt yomuntu.
Now, I'm not sure whether this is a ballistic question. If it's a ballistic, you let me know. A witness testified in this court that he observed a firearm that was used by one of the suspects, that it had a will. In your experience, in your training as a pathologist, will you know the type of firearm that's got a will?
No, I won't.
Okay.
Ukuthi ke kwakuyisibhamu esasinesondo ke angeke ngikwazi ke lokho.
And you've testified, and it's at page 6 of your report, in the specimens retained. And then it says blood and swabs from the fingerprints were taken for DA analysis, and the serial bag number and the SQE person that you handed the specimen to. Was GSR or PR test done on the hands of the victim himself?
I don't know.
Ukuthi ke lama test kunama test enziwa ke kuwona ke inzipho noma ama nails akhe umufi lokho angikwazi.
Now, I'm touching on the other aspect that was raised by my learned colleague from the States, which is the following. A witness has testified in this court that upon hearing that the victim was shot and they being informed, that is the person who testified plus community members, they went to a nearby park to look for the alleged perpetrators. And they searched the park, and after plus minus 12 minutes, they went back to the scene. And when they entered through this door, just near the hallway here, they found the victim lying down, unattended. Now, my question to you is this. After plus minus 12 minutes of no medical attendance at all on the victim, would he have survived that wound he suffered?
The doctor has just testified that it's not possible that he would have been alive for hours.
Okay, all right.
He says it's seconds.
Seconds or milliseconds.
Yeah,
okay, it's fine. It's fine, madam. If the court can bear with me, I'm rushing out. Now, as well as, just for clarification purposes, that the same persons, when they returned from the park, they tried to sit the victim up and then they saw blood on the back. Is it procedure, or how would that affect the injuries if somebody shot on the chest? Is people try to sit him up or pick him up like that? With respect to the internal injuries.
In terms of worsening that injuries, are you saying that?
Yes.
It won't do much. It won't do much.
Ukuthi ke base befika ke bemphakamisa ke noma bemhlalisa ke ukuthi ngenza ke ukuthi ke inxeba lelo ke ukuthi ke libe buhlungu kakhulu ke noma limale kakhulu ke angeke kwenze akunamanakalo nje lokho ongakwenza.
Okay. As the court pleases, my lord, that is the questions that I have for the doctor.
Mr. Mlisi?
As it is the court, my lord. Good day, Doc.
Good afternoon.
Oh, good afternoon, Doc. Thank you, Doc. I'm going to try and paint a scenario that was given by the state witnesses who testified, eyewitnesses who testified about how possibly the incident might have had happened in the house. I will do that with a view to try and give you just a bit of a background. Then we come and speak about your possible findings on the fact that the firearm was most probably fired from an angle of depression. Do you understand? Thank you. Now, according to the eyewitnesses, well, there are two versions, but I'll explain them to you. One side of the story is that just a bit of a background. According to the state witnesses, there are two people who got into the house whilst they were seated in the sitting room, one of which had a firearm. The other one did not have a firearm in his possession. Now, the one who had a firearm gave some instruction that he wanted money and cell phones. One of the occupants of the house stood up and accosted the gentleman who had a firearm, pushed him aside, and then he dashed out of the house. That's when then the rest of the occupants of the house also stood up, and a commotion then happened. They accosted the two people, the intruders, we prefer to call them intruders here at court, up to the kitchen area. That is generally the bit of a background. Now, one version from the eyewitnesses who were in the house is that the deceased then was in a tussle or was fighting with the person who had a firearm. That's now one of the versions. And as they were fighting, the person who had a firearm had his back on the kitchen door, as you're looking at photo number 15. In other words, the firearm person, or the person who was in possession of the firearm, was leaning on the kitchen door as the deceased was facing him. Do you follow? Now, there was a shot that went off, and everybody started to run away. there's basically no indication that somebody said, no, I saw how the shot was fired. It was just a shot that went off as the deceased and the person with the firearm were fighting for the firearm. Now, I know you might know we are not a ballistic expert, but on the basis of that first scenario, when you look at photo number 15, those are the markings where the bullet struck the door as well. Would you say that accords with the explanation, taking into account that the deceased was on the other side of the door? He was not leaning on the door. It was actually the person who had a firearm who was on the door. Would you say that accords with the factual explanation as presented to this court? And also, the fact that according to your finding, the bullet was fired from an angle of depression.
No, that would not make sense.
Ngendlela ke oyichaza ngayo ngoba ke ummeli umchazele indlela ke echaziwe ofakazi ukuthi ke lo owayephethe isibhamu wayencike esicabheni uma ufike yena ke engaphakathi ke endlini ebheke kuyena kodwa udokotela mayiphendula ke uthi ngalendlela oyichaza ngayo ke angeke ke ayihlangani ke ngalendlela oyichaza ngayo.
Thank you. Now, that was just the first scenario that was given to this court by the state witnesses. Now, the second scenario is one of the witnesses also testified that as the skirmishness was happening in the kitchen, the deceased was in a tussle or was fighting with the person who did not have a firearm, and that fighting was taking place at that door area. Do you follow? As and when the person who did not have a firearm was fighting with the deceased at that door area, the person who had a firearm was behind the deceased. Do you also follow? Now, again, in view of your explanation that the shot, in view of your analysis and your conclusion that a shot could have been fired from an angle of depression, does the second scenario also accord with your finding?
Do I understand you correctly? Is that this scenario implies that the deceased was shot from the back? Do I understand you correctly?
I did not get that, Doc. You're a bit low.
Do I understand you correctly?
Yes.
If the scenario that you have described implies that the deceased was shot from the back, so the entrance wound would have been at his back. Do I understand you correctly?
I'm not implying anything. I'm only trying to give you the facts that were presented to this court. In terms of the second scenario, the person who had a firearm being at the back of the deceased. Now, in terms of your finding, is that the entry wound is on the sternum, is on the front chest, and the exit wound is at the back. Now, the witness says the deceased was in a tussle with a person. This is just a repetition. Was in a tussle with a person who did not have the firearm, but the person who had a firearm was at the back of the deceased. Now your findings are saying the entry wound was in the front, the exit wound was in the back, and more so, from your analysis of the wound, is that the bullet could have been fired from an angle of depression. just your opinion. Does that accord with your findings?
No, it does not, my Lord.
Lokhu kokuthi ke uma ufike wayelwisana nomuntu ke owayengaphethe isibhamu bese kuukuthi lo wayephethe isibhamu wayengasemakheke ke umufi kwase lokho ke akuhlangani ke naloku mina ke engikutholile uma ngaba sengihlola ke ngibheka wona ke umzimba wakhe umufi akuhlangani ke ukuthi lo wayephethe isibhamu wayengasemuva kwakhe.
Thank you, Doc. I had so many questions, but I realized that most of them relate to ballistic expertise, and you're a pathologist. You dissect bodies when they come there to identify the causes of death, not so. Thank you, Doc. I don't think I've got any further questions to you. Thank you, Doc.
Imibuzo mina miningi ke kodwa iphathelene nama ballistic.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, I do have questions, my Lord. Thank
Yes,
you.
yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Doctor, thank you, Doctor. Amongst the police officers, Doctor, that attended the autopsy was Warrant Officer Mhlahlo and Captain Mangena. Do you confirm that?
Yes.
Yebo ke kwamanye amaphoyisa noma kumaphoyisa ayekhona ke enkathi ngangenza ke umsebenzi wami kwaku warrant officer Mhlahlo nakanye ke no Captain Mangena.
Doctor, there is evidence by one of these witnesses or police officials that the bullet projectile that was found at the crime scene was not measured. Against that background, at the autopsy, Doctor, were there any measurements that were taken by the police officers of the exit and entrance wounds?
No, the usual practice is that the doctor who is performing the autopsy will take the measurements of the wound.
There is also evidence, Doctor, that if you look at the sketch plan, it was shot at the door will be the below part of just look at the sketch plan. The door will be, the lower part of the sketch plan will be at the lower part of the sketch plan.
Yes.
Yes. And then there is also evidence that he was able to move from that point and he fell on the sitting room. There are couches there. The red, yes, those are two couches opposite each other. And he fell in between the couch on the right, and the TV stand. Will that be possible?
Yes.
Ukuthi ke wasuka khona lapha yana ke ekitchen waye wakule la kunama couch khona yebo kungenzeka lokho.
You also testified, Doctor, that the deceased bled heavily internally. He bled internally.
Yes,
Yes.
that's correct.
Shilo ke noma ukuthi waphaka kakhulu ke kodwa ophake ophela khona ngaphakathi.
Would he also bleed external, that is from the exit wound?
There would have been dripping of wounds. I mean, this is an open wound, like a normal skin wound. So there would be dribbling of blood. Certainly, it could be there.
Yebo ke nokuconsiza kwegazi ke liconisizela ngaphandle ke nako ke bekungakhona.
Will also be correct, Doctor, that this dripping of blood will be from the kitchen, that is the point at the door to the sitting room, in between the couch and the TV stand. The dribbling will be found from the kitchen, that is the movement from where he was to the sitting room.
Yes, if you found them, then you can assume that was the movement after he was shot.
Okay.
Nokuthi ke uma kuloko consiza ukutholileka ukusuka ekitchen ukuya khona ke sitting room la uma kwakutholakele ke ungasho ukuthi yebo kwakunjalo.
Doctor, when you look at the photo album, Exhibit D, starting from photo 12, 15, 26. You will confirm, doctor, that there is no dripping of blood. Amongst the few photos that I've highlighted to you.
15,
15,
12, 15,
26.
26. Yeah, I don't see any blood there.
Yebo ke kule ithombe ongikhombisa zona ke 12, 15 no 26 yebo angiboni igazi lapho.
Doctor, there's been this theory by the defense that the scene was contaminated, cleaned before the arrival of the police. Will that suggest that theory if you don't see the dripping of blood?
If he was walking and if he was dripping blood, then surely, yeah.
Uma kuwukuthi wayehamba, uma kuthi wayiqonsisa igazi, yebo ke impela ke wawuzolindela ke.
I mean, doctor, there's been this theory by the defense that the scene was contaminated, interfered with before the arrival of the police. So the absence of blood will mean or support that theory that there has been some contamination by some people before the police arrive.
That's it.
You mean blood?
Yes, blood spots.
It's because contamination is ambiguous. Unless I understand the doctor, he says if he was dripping blood, the deceased, just listen to me, doc, the deceased had a T-shirt on. And if you look at the photos, when he was brought to the hospital, as your observation, his T-shirt was bloodied, backwards and forwards. And according to your analysis, blood also percolated towards his trousers.
That's correct.
Right, so that's the background. This gentleman was not naked.
Yes.
That's it. Can you exclude the possibility of the blood percolating from the wound? You actually testify that there was no squirting or sprouting of the blood. It was not like
squirting out.
Yes, telescoped. He was bloodied. Most of the blood was contained within the chest cavity. Is that
Yes,
so?
that's so.
Yeah, that's the background. I understand. Yes.
Maybe, doctor, if I can make a U-turn and ask the following question in a different way. There's a witness here by Ulelani Ngaje. He says when he arrived at the scene, he found the deceased at the passage. The passage will be, sorry, Kaya Ngaje. Sorry, it's Kaya Ngaje, not Bulelani. Sorry, doctor, I'm just looking for this photo so that I can take you straight away to the photo. I'm sorry, doctor, it's a pity that that passage is not clearly depicted. Maybe if we can use the sketch plan, the sketch plan that you have just used. Thank you. Yes, he found him lying at that point, facing upward. With the exit wound, is it also possible to find blood, to find blood there at that spot? If the deceased was lying upward, facing upward, and there is an exit wound at his back.
This is possible.
Uma kuwukuthi wayeleli laphayana ke nanjengoba ke ukhaya Ngache ashilo ke ukuthi wayeleli laphayana futhi ebheke phezulu ke yebo wawungalindelaka ukuthi ke futhi inxeba ke leli inhlamvu yaphuma kulona engasemuva wawungalindela ukuthola igazi laphayana.
Doctor, would that be drops of blood or it will be a pool of blood where you would be lying,
It depends.
facing upwards?
It would be like a smudge area that you would be lying in, as if your clothes are wet and you lie on something.
Lokho ke kuwukuthi ke asithi lana ke impahla zakho noma oyigqokile ke zimanzi ke bese kuthi ke uleli phezulu kothoke amakhona lento oleli phezulu kwayo.
I also heard you, doctor, saying that if the deceased was against the door, the kitchen door, the bullets would have gone through, exited, and went through the door. What did you mean by that?
You never said that. Did you say that, Doc? that the bullet went through the door? I can see you're
If
surprised.
the bullet was through him and it
Yeah.
went out of him,
Yes.
it could have gone through the door.
Yeah, it could have.
Yeah.
Not it went through the door.
Yes, I'm sorry, my not, it could have.
uthi ngishilo-ke ukuthi uma kuwukuthi inhlamvu yamshaya-ke yaphuma kuyena-ke yasishaya esicabheni-ke kwakungenzeka-ke ukuthi ingaphuma akathi ukuthi yayingaphuma yaphuma kwakungenzeka ukuthi ingaphuma ngaso isicabha.
Thank my Lord, I have no questions.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Shololo.
Counsel.
Thank you, my lord. Dr. Steenkamp, you testified about the wound track. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay. You testified about the wound track, that it was from the front to the back, but towards lower side, towards the back. Am I correct? Did I understand you correct?
Yes, from
Okay.
front to back, and downwards and away from the midline.
Downwards.
ngishilo-ke ukuthi sathi iminqabelelo engaphambili-ke liya ngasemuva lehla-ke mase lisuka-ke kuyona lokhu kubizwa ukuthi iline yawo-ke umzimba noma i-midline.
Okay. Could that have been caused by the fact that the shooter was taller than the deceased?
It's possible, yes.
Lokho kwangabangelwa-ke noma kwangenzeka-ke ukuthi lo owayedubula-ke wayemude kunomufi.
Okay. In a lay's term, doctor, if I understand the gunshot wound that you examined, was it a fatal wound or what?
I beg your pardon?
The gunshot wound, was it a fatal wound or what?
Yes, it was a fatal wound.
Lona-ke lelo nqaba lelo-ke elabangelwa-ke noma elokudutshulwa kwakhe-ke kwakuyilona-ke inqaba nje babangela-ke ukushona kwakhe-ke noma elingabangela nje ukulimala kwakhe.
Okay. Yes, I do understand that, but just clarify this for me. Would it have made a difference had the deceased been transported in a stretcher than being transported in a private car to the hospital?
It was a fatal wound and he would have survived a few seconds to minutes. I don't think so. I think if you are in a situation where you have a critical ill patient, you should try and get him to the hospital. But that's my opinion. I'm not a clinician. I'm a pathologist.
Kuwuvo lwami-ke ukuthi noma-ke wayehanjiswe nge-stretcher-ke angahanjiswa ngemoto e-private ukuthi kwangeke kwenze umehluko lokho-ke ngoba uma kwisimo la umuntu khona-ke ethola ukulimala okukanjena-ke ufanele ukuthi umthole esibhedlela noma umfikise esibhedlela.
From the qualifications that you have testified about in this court that you obtained in 1976, does it include the ballistic evidence?
I've never done ballistics, no.
It's not included in this degree.
I never did a course in ballistics.
Angikaze nje ngafunda-ke ngokuphathelene nezibhamu noma ama-ballistics.
You further testified about the blackening on the wound track. You remember that, Doc?
That's correct.
Ngishilo-ke noma ngifakazile-ke ngala ujika khona kube mnyama-ke kulona-ke inxeba noma kulimala lokho.
Did you take any samples along the blackening? Did you take any samples to the laboratory in order to determine whether what type of the blackening you saw, whether it was because of the powder or it was because of the cloth or any other thing?
No, I did not.
Angizange ngithathe lutho-ke ukuthi-ke ithunyelwe-ke e-lab babheke ukuthi yini-ke eyabangela-ke ukuthi kuze kushintsheke ubala kube mnyama lapho.
If that test was not done, how do we know what type of the blackening was there on the gunshot wound if it was not taken for examination?
Well, that's the usual that we do. We don't do much others. We usually don't send those bloodstained soot and debris for examination unless we want to do, we're not sure that it is, for instance, the stippling, for instance, then we would take histology. But I've never heard people taking from a wound the blackening.
Angikaze ngakuzwa ke ngaphambilini la ukuthi la kunenxeba khona ke ukuthi lo ndawo la kushintshe khona kwamnyama ukuthi bayathatha base bekuthumela kuyobhekwa ke ngaphandle nje ukuthi uma ke singenaso isiqiniseko kodwa angikaze ngakuzwa lokho.
But to confirm your observation, that should have assisted to confirm what you observed on the wound.
Not really, unless I was doubtful as to what else it could be, and I don't know what much else it can be.
Akusikona ke ukuthi kwakuzosiza ngaphandleni kokuthi ngangingenaso isiqiniseko noma nganginokungabaza enganginako.
Just one last question, Doctor. I know we have answered this question, but I also want to get it from you. That you said at the time when the deceased was shot, from your observations, it means that he would have been facing inside the house. I'm not sure whether you still remember that picture where the door was shown.
Yeah. Number 15, yeah.
From your observation, then it would mean that the deceased was shot when he was facing inside the house.
Not from my observations.
No, I mean from...
If I consider the fact that there's that might be a bullet wound, a bullet in the door or something, then that would make sense.
Sorry, you can finish.
But if he was shot from the other side, then there must have been a bullet towards the house.
Uma kuukuthi ke manje sengibona ke benhlamvu ke noma kunokulimala khona esicabheni ke lokho kungasho ukuthi impela wayebheke ngaphakathi endlini kodwa uma kuukuthi wayebheke ngaphakathi kodwa uma kuukuthi wayebheke kusona ke isicapha kwakufanele ukuthi ke ukulimala kungaphakathi endlini.
Okay, and that is from your observation that the exit wound was in front.
No.
So that the entrance wound was in front.
That's correct, yes.
That's correct.
Ukuthi inxeba ke la imbumbulu eyangena khona ke lale ngaphambili.
Okay, thank you, my lord. I've got no further questions.
Thank you. Any re-exam, Mr.
Maybe just one aspect. Doctor, you were asked by counsel for accused number 4 about the possibility of blood dripping from the kitchen into the sitting room. You testify that your findings was that that blood would be squirting from the wound. Now the question is, after how long would?
No. The doctor never said that.
Yes.
Yes,
let me just rephrase. Yes. After how long would the blood start squirting from the wound?
The blood only squirts if there's an artery involved.
Yes.
So if you cut your artery, like your wrist artery, and the blood squirts out,
yes,
then you'd see these. The blood people or the ballistic people can probably tell you better about the squirt, that kind of thing. But there was no artery involved here. There was not externally.
Yes.
All this was internally. So blood was squirting, but internally, not
Ukuthi ke
externally.
indlela yokuphuma kwegazi noma ke liphuma ke ngokusheshsha ke lingaconsizi ke ukuthi mhlasimbe uma ushayeke lana ke esandleni la elingaphuma khona ke lenze ukusquirta kodwa lana ke la liphuma kodwa liphumela ngaphakathi hayi ngaphandle.
Any other thing you want to add, Doctor?
No, thank you, my lord.
Are you not master? Steenkamp?
I am supposed to be.
I
Like
know.
the surgeons are very particular about
I know.
that. They want to be called Mr.
Yes.
Mr. I'm actually a Mr.
That's correct, yes. We keep saying doctor. When I was listening to your curriculum vitae, I realized that we have a master in front of it. Well, having said that, I don't know how you would have felt when you were still alive in the year 15 of July. Is it March, when Julius Caesar was assassinated?
It was March, 15th
Yeah,
of
15th
March.
of March, 44 before Christ, when the first post-mortem was conducted. And the cause of death, despite the fact that he was stabbed 32 times or 25 times, only one stab wound was responsible for the death.
One fatal wound.
Okay, thank you.
Can I be excused?
Yeah, you're excused now. Yes, sir.
As a court, please, small.